Welcome to Life Stories, where real experiences and powerful lessons come to life. Today, we'll dive into the journey of Claire, a young woman who spent her entire life living in the shadow of family expectations. From early childhood, she was forced to sacrifice her own dreams to meet the demands of her parents and take care of her sister. But at a pivotal moment, Claire made a choice that would change everything. She chose herself. Join us as we explore her path to independence, the challenges she faced, and the profound lessons she learned along the way. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel to start the story today. I don't remember the exact moment I realized I was different from my sister Emily. It may have been when I was 7, and she was 4, sitting on the floor with her dolls while I stood at the kitchen counter, helping Mom prepare dinner. I remember looking out the window at the children playing outside and feeling like I was the one missing out. But I was taught to stay focused, to help, to do my part. Even then, I had a strange sense that things were never quite fair, though I couldn't put it into words at the time. The days followed a familiar rhythm. After school, while other kids played or went to the park, I found myself at home, scrubbing dishes that were often too high for me to reach. "Claire, homework done?" Mom would ask every day, her voice sharp with the weight of expectations. As though she thought I might slack off, I would answer, already tying on the 2 oversized aprons she bought me for my 6th birthday. A practical gift, she'd called it, and yes, my homework was done, but it didn't feel like it mattered. What mattered was that I helped. That I was there, that I could be counted on. Sarah, my little sister, could run off and play. But I had to stay and work. I don't blame her, she was just a kid. But Mom never saw it that way. "She's still little," she'd say if I ever voiced my frustration. "You're the older one, you need to help out." Those words, always words of duty, never of care, stuck with me. They molded me into someone who believed that the only way to earn love was through sacrifice. Dad wasn't much different. When he came home from work, he would ruffle Emily's hair, beaming with pride over her latest creation. And when he turned to me, his eyes would narrow with the same expectation that had hung over me since I could remember. "How are your grades today, Claire?" Not, "How was your day?" or, "What did you learn?" Just, grades. It was the only thing that seemed to matter. The only way I could see that I had value. I always tried to meet that expectation. But I also felt that no matter how hard I worked, it was never enough. Our house wasn't big, a modest 2-story in a middle-class neighborhood. But it might as well have been a mansion for how little it felt like home. My friends lived nearby, but I barely saw them outside of school. There was always something that needed doing. The dishes, the laundry, helping Emily with her homework. I never had time to just be a kid. I had to study to maintain my grades, to prove my worth. One afternoon, I was 10, and I had just won first place in the regional math competition. I remember that moment with perfect clarity, standing in front of my teacher, who beamed with pride as she praised me. "Claire's love for learning is extraordinary," Mrs. Peterson said. Mom and Dad exchanged proud glances. "We've always encouraged her to read," Mom said, her hand gently resting on my shoulder. But I wanted to tell Mrs. Peterson the truth. I had stayed up late studying by flashlight because daytime was for chores. The only encouragement I ever received was the threat of disappointment if I didn't get perfect grades. But I just smiled and nodded. That was the role I was expected to play, the obedient daughter, the one who never caused trouble. Meanwhile, Emily was in the hallway, making paper airplanes out of her failed math test, laughing as though the world were a playground. No one said anything about it. No lectures, no consequences. I remember how, when I was 12, Emily once told me, "You're just jealous. Mom and Dad like me better." I stood there, staring at my reflection in the bathroom mirror, hand still wet from cleaning it. I wanted to deny it. But deep down, part of me wondered if it was true. By the time Emily entered middle school, I had essentially become her personal tutor, not by choice, but by command. Every afternoon, after my own school day and all the chores, I would sit with her, explaining algebra while she texted under the table. "Emily, you need to focus," I would say, exhausted but determined. "Why?" she'd reply with that irritating smirk of hers. You'll just do it for me anyway. And I would. It was easier than facing the wrath of Mom's disappointment. Mom would inevitably ask, "Why isn't Emily's homework done yet?" And when I told her Emily wasn't paying attention, she would turn to me. "Make her focus. You're supposed to be helping her." And so, I did. I did her homework while she watched YouTube. It was always easier than confronting the reality of our family dynamics. Meanwhile, Emily would get her weekly allowance, a full $20 every Friday. Me? I was lucky if I got $5 a month. And that came with a lecture about how money doesn't grow on trees. But the breaking point came when I turned 16. I couldn't stand watching Emily flaunt her new clothes, her fancy gadgets, while I wore hand-me-downs and couldn't even buy lunch at school. That's when I saw the "Help Wanted" sign at Joe's Cafe. Just 3 blocks from our house. Joe, a gruff man with kind eyes who had served me countless hot chocolates over the years, hired me on the spot. The work was hard, waiting tables, cleaning up spills, dealing with grumpy customers, but it was mine. For the first time in my life, I was earning my own money. I could finally buy what I needed and, for once, feel like I had some control over my life. That first paycheck, $850 for a month of part-time work, felt like freedom. I should have known better than to leave it on my desk. The next evening, as I sat down for dinner, I had no idea that my small victory, the sense of independence that my paycheck gave me, was about to be stripped away. The whole family was gathered around the table, and as usual, Mom was busy in the kitchen, while Dad sat at the head of the table with Emily, already deep into conversation about her day. I'd just walked in, a little tired from my shift at the cafe. My uniform still on, the smell of greasy food lingering in my hair. I set my purse down, my fingers brushing against the envelope containing my paycheck. I didn't think much of it at first. I was just glad to sit down and eat. But as I reached for the fork, I heard it. Mom's voice, sharp and questioning, pierced the air. "Claire, come here," she said, and I felt a chill settle in my stomach. I stood up, walking to the kitchen, where both Mom and Dad were sitting. Dad looked stern, his eyebrows furrowed as he glanced at the envelope on the table. My heart started to race. "Why didn't you tell us you were making this much?" Dad asked, his voice colder than I'd ever heard it. "I just got paid," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. But it trembled slightly. There was an awkward silence, the weight of the moment settling on me like a thick fog. Then, without warning, Mom spoke, her voice sharp. "Well, since you're living in our house and eating our food, you'll be giving us half of this. It's only fair." I felt my face flush with anger, but I didn't know how to respond. The idea that they felt entitled to half of my paycheck didn't even feel like a request. It was an expectation, a command. I stood there, stunned, my mind racing for words. But none came. How could they do this? How could they take what little I had worked for? What little I could finally call my own? The worst part wasn't even giving up half of my paycheck. It was what happened next. A week later, I walked in from a shift at the cafe to see Emily. All smiles, showing off a new pair of Nike sneakers. "Look what Mom and Dad bought me with your money," she said, spinning around in the living room, oblivious to the resentment rising in me. For a moment, all I could do was stare at her, my breath coming in shallow bursts. It was too much. I locked myself in the bathroom that night and cried. A kind of angry, exhausted sob that seemed to release everything I had been holding in for years. And as I wiped my tears away, it was also the moment I made my decision. I was getting out of here. College was my ticket to freedom. My parents would never pay for it. They made that clear every time they talked about how Emily would need money for her college expenses. So, I decided to do it on my own. I threw myself into my studies. I spent hours in the library after school, researching scholarships and grants. Every spare moment was dedicated to studying for the SATs, writing essays, and maintaining my perfect GPA. I had no choice. If I wanted to escape, I had to make it happen myself. Graduation came, and it was exactly what I had expected. Another performance of the perfect family, with my parents basking in the glow of my achievements. As I walked across the stage in my blue cap and gown, I saw them in the audience, nodding proudly, smiling as they always did when others praised them for their impeccable parenting. The Matthews have done an extraordinary job raising Claire, the principal announced, and my parents beamed. But I knew the truth, none of this had been for them. It was all for me. And as I took my diploma, I held on to the secret that would change everything. I had already received acceptance letters from every college I had applied to. But the one I had chosen was Riverside State University. It was 4 hours away, far enough that I wouldn't be able to come home on weekends. It was a full scholarship, including housing and a stipend. And it was my ticket to freedom. I hadn't told my parents yet. I was waiting for the right moment. That moment came sooner than I expected. At our graduation dinner, as Mom served herself another helping of pasta, what she thought was my favorite, she asked me with that hopeful smile. "Have you thought about what you're going to do now, Claire?" I opened my mouth to tell them about Riverside, about my scholarship. But before I could get a word out, Mom continued, her smile widening. "I was talking to Joe at the cafe yesterday. He said he'd be happy to take you on full-time. Wouldn't that be wonderful? You could earn so much more and really help out with the family expenses." It was like a slap to the face. My stomach twisted, but I took a deep breath. My fingers clenched around the edge of the table. I got accepted to college. Full scholarship. I'm starting in the fall. The silence that followed was deafening. My parents' faces fell. Mom's fork clattered against her plate. And Dad's face turned an alarming shade of red. "College?" Mom hissed, the shock in her voice almost tangible. "But what about your family? What about helping your sister?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "I've been helping my sister my entire life," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "This is something I need to do for myself." And with that, my world as I had known it, one full of sacrifice and duty, began to unravel. The dinner that night ended in silence. My parents barely spoke to me after I revealed my plans. The air in the room was thick with unspoken words. With disappointment, anger, and perhaps, deep down, fear. Fear of losing control over me. I felt their eyes on me as I sat there, heart pounding, trying to steady myself amidst the emotional storm brewing around us. Emily didn't say anything. Of course, she just sat there, her eyes flicking from my parents to me. A small, knowing smirk on her face. As though she already understood that I was about to break free from the family dynamic. After the dinner, things at home grew cold and uncomfortable. It was like living with strangers, people who didn't know me at all anymore. Mom and Dad hardly spoke to me, except for the occasional necessary exchange about dinner times or bills. There was no warmth, no affection. They no longer had control over me. And it seemed that they didn't know how to react. The money I had earned, the hours I had worked, all the sacrifices I had made, they felt entitled to it all. And now, when I stood up for myself, when I claimed something for me, they recoiled. The final straw came when I received my first paycheck from my cafe job. It was $850, more money than I had ever had in my life. I felt a sense of freedom, like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. But when I got home that night, I walked into a scene that made my blood run cold. My parents were sitting at the kitchen table, the paycheck lying between them like a piece of meat to be carved. "Why didn't you tell us you were making this much?" Dad demanded, his voice low, full of accusation. "I just got paid," I stammered, not understanding why they had a right to question me, let alone expect me to give half of it up. But that was their plan. They were going to take what was mine. Without hesitation, Mom declared, "You're living under our roof, eating our food, and that means you'll give us half of this. It's only fair." It wasn't about fairness. It was about control. I was a means to their end. Their lives weren't their responsibility. I was. That night, Emily paraded her new things around like a queen, showing off a new pair of sneakers she had been given, bought with my money. I locked myself in the bathroom, seething. I had never felt so used, so unappreciated. They took my hard work, my independence, and turned it into another way to exploit me. I knew then that I had to leave. I couldn't stay in this suffocating environment any longer. College had always been my escape. But now, it wasn't just a way to get an education, it was my ticket to freedom. to a life of my own. My parents had made it clear they wouldn't support me. Not financially, but I didn't need them. I had to do it on my own. I poured myself into my studies. I stayed up late into the night, researching scholarships and tuition-free programs. I practiced for the SATs with an intensity I hadn't known I had. I couldn't afford to fail. My escape depended on it. The day of graduation came. And it was exactly what I had expected. A performance. Mom and Dad sat in the audience, wearing their proud faces as I walked across the stage to accept my diploma. "The Matthews have done an extraordinary job raising Claire," the principal announced, and I could almost feel the weight of their pride. The pride they had in themselves for producing such a model child. But as I stood there, I knew the truth. They hadn't raised me for me. They raised me for them. And when I took that diploma in my hand, I also held the truth close to my chest. I had already been accepted to Riverside State University. Full scholarship, housing included. It was 4 hours away. And that was far enough to finally break free from their clutches. They didn't know yet. And I wasn't sure how to tell them. I wasn't even sure if I could. I had spent my whole life trying to meet their expectations. But now, finally, I was ready to meet my own. The moment came sooner than I expected. Though, when we gathered for a family dinner after graduation, Mom asked the question I knew was coming. Her eyes hopeful, almost desperate. "Have you thought about what you're going to do now, Claire?" Before I could even speak, she continued, "Joe at the cafe said he'd be happy to take you on full-time. Wouldn't that be wonderful? You could really help with the family finances." I almost couldn't believe what I was hearing. I had worked so hard to earn my own money, to break free from their expectations. And here she was, expecting me to stay. I got accepted to college. I said quietly, "Full scholarship. I'm starting in the fall." The silence that followed was deafening. Mom's fork clattered against her plate. Dad turned pale, and his face grew redder as he opened his mouth to speak. But I had already said what I needed to say. I was done. "This is something I need to do for myself," I added, my voice firm despite the storm brewing inside me. It was the first time I had ever stood up to them in this way. The first time I had chosen myself. And it felt like a weight lifting off my shoulders, even as the realization of the consequences hit me like a freight train. Leaving home was the hardest thing I had ever done. As I packed my bags and said my silent goodbyes to a family that never truly understood me, I felt a mixture of relief and sorrow. It wasn't the love I had for them that made it difficult, but the realization that I had to walk away from everything I had known in order to find myself. I had always been the dutiful daughter, the one who carried the weight of responsibility on my shoulders. But in leaving, I was finally giving myself the freedom to breathe, to grow, to choose my own path. College was my sanctuary. Riverside State University became my new home, where I could reinvent myself and learn to be the person I was always meant to be. I thrived in an environment where I was valued for my mind, my work ethic, and my passion, not for what I could give to others. I made new friends who saw me for who I truly was. Not the version of me that had been molded by expectations. But even as I built my new life, my family continued to live in their old patterns. They reached out, guilt-tripping me, making me feel like I owed them for everything. But I had learned a lesson that I would carry with me for the rest of my life. My worth was not tied to what I could give to others. I had the right to live for myself, to chase my own dreams, and to define my own success. And as time passed, I realized something profound. Sometimes, you need to lose everything in order to find yourself. It was the hardest, yet most freeing thing I had ever done. For more life stories and inspiring journeys, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for new videos.